although we've introduced ourselves, we thought we'd try to fit in some hands-on activities in this session. So we've got a few things, some short, some slightly longer. And we tried this activity recently in another session. So I'm not sure how many people have used Adobe Spark Video. Have any of you used it? Some shaking of heads there. So what we'd like you to do is, it's a bit of a challenge, throwing you in at the deep end right away, but we'll give you a bit of time. Adobe Spark Video is a web platform, and once you get going with it, it's really quick and easy to use. And you're probably aware that Maths Week is coming up, and we'll pop the link in the chat if you haven't had a chance to have a look at the range of things that are on next week. And one thing that particularly caught my eye was the nice idea of story time for younger pupils. And there are some people, well-known people, I think, reading stories with a maths flavor and maths focus for younger pupils. Now, of course, we haven't got time to ask you to record a whole story. So the challenge today is, can you do a quick introduction? Once you've had a chance to think about Maths Week, maybe mention one thing that you would like, hypothetically, or that you've already planned to do during Maths Week. So we're going to give you about 15 minutes. I'm going to give you a quick demonstration now, very fast, of Adobe Spark Video. So we've got a link to it here. If you've never used it before, it will ask you to log in, and you can do that with a school email address. Once you're in, there's a whole host of features. We're only using a very small fraction of what's available today. And I know I certainly find it quite a lot to take in, what's where. It's all obvious once you know. But I remind myself that if I look over to the far left, it's that blue circle with the plus in that allows you to create something new, something for the first time. Martine's back in the waiting room. That's great. And if you click on that blue circle with the plus, you get some options. And today the option is video. So I'm going to click on the link here now. Hopefully I'm going to be able to sign in 1 second. It's just taking a little while to load here. Okay, so I'm going to sign in now. And I'm going to continue with Google. Now, if you've used it before, of course, you can go to your project section or scroll down. But as I mentioned, over on the left-hand side, there's the plus icon. I'm going to go down to video. You can add a title if you want to here. That's not required. And there are all sorts of templates as well, but I'm going to go on make up my own. So you'll see the basic idea is a sequence of slides, but each one of those slides can have text or video or photo, or there are some icons as well. So I'll just play this little demonstration. You can change the timings. You can have one slide only, but it's got a whole range of different graphics and ready-made templates and options. So it's possible to put something quite slick together very quickly. So I'm going to pause that now because I think you've probably got the idea. And here we are, the slides down at the bottom. And I created one earlier, which you'll see in a few moments. I posted it to the Padlet. I downloaded it from the top option here, once it was finished, just a few seconds long. I happen to have a photo of myself from the CLC website available, and then it was mainly the recording option that I used. And as with all of these tools, you might have to allow permissions to use the microphone or camera. So I hope that's given you a flavour of what's possible. We are going to give you some time, as I said, to put something together. And then the Padlet, where we'd like you to upload it, if you have a chance, looks something like this. And I think probably everyone in this session is familiar with Padlet, but again, you're looking for the plus sign. So here's my corny photo, and I'm not going to play the video now, but it's just a little bit of me speaking, talking about Maths Week and puzzles. Okay, so any questions? Here's the recap. Introduce yourself, audio, text. It really doesn't matter what you do. It's just a chance to have a play with Adobe Spark Video. If you feel that's not enough time, Rowan, you were mentioning there's the other option of recording directly onto the Padlet with the microphone or capturing a video there. That's an alternative as well. So shall we say 10-15 minutes? If you finish quicker than that, just let us know and we'll move on. And Rowan's posted the Padlet and Adobe Spark Video. Can we put the link in as well? Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rowan. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Just check everyone's okay with that. Does that all make sense? And of course, whilst you're playing with Spark Video, you may have some other ideas about how you could use it as a teacher as well. And if you haven't had a look at what's on offer for Maths Week, do check that out as well. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again, and let's have a quick look at those things that are on the Padlet. Since it's really quite worrying as a presenter to have almost complete silence for 15 minutes. So thank you so much for all the concentration that's been going on. So here we are. Hopefully you can see that now, and let's see if we can play a couple of clips. So first is Laura's. And Laura, was there sound on that? Maybe
only like music, yeah.
Some music. So I'll try one more time. Ah, okay, it's loaded now. Fantastic, thank you very much. And on to Martine's.
Hi everyone, my name is Martine and I'm from Hitherfield Primary School. I am a joint maths lead and a Year 2 teacher. For Maths Week, I'd like to focus on collaborating through investigations and problem-solving activities.
Well, thank you very much for that. And just before we go on to the next section, I'm sure you've had a look at the Maths Week website, but I thought it was quite useful that there are various things in there, including links to the maths subject associations. And I know we spoke briefly about that in the last forum, and I was pleased to see that the resource sheet that we looked at last time, I don't know if you recall, a whole collection of useful tools and links to other sites, that's still available. So we've got another Padlet later on, and I've actually posted that on the other Padlet for you. I think we need to move on really quickly now. So yeah, I mean, I guess that was a good example of what we're about at the CLC. We're always encouraging people to explore creative use of digital tools. And coming up in a moment, we know that some of you have sent in some contributions, so thank you very much for that. Here's the other things that we were looking at. Because this is a forum, we'd like to give you a chance in a moment to talk about current challenges and as well as successes. Rowan's got a section where she's going to show you some further ideas for using Scratch for maths. We're going to have a short break, and there is something to ask you to do, but it's fine. We may not have time, and that could be for after the forum's finished. And then the second half, we're going to focus particularly this time on personalised learning. We're involved with an Erasmus-funded project with some European partners, and we're putting together a toolkit that looks at different ways of personalising learning and what that might mean. So we've got a section lined up for you for that and some evaluation at the end. So Rowan, could I hand over to you to start off this next section?
Yeah, so if you want to go on to the next slide. So just to kind of mention that we sent an email out, and we did this for the last maths forum as well, asking people if they had any examples that they would be happy to share. I know that possibly not everybody might have got those emails because they went to the computing lead, so if you didn't, then don't worry, but we did have a few examples, so thank you those who shared. This is actually one from last time when we asked people to share examples of things that had worked well specifically remotely, and so this is an example from Jack, and he talked about using objects found around the home to create kind of physical Venn diagrams, which I thought was a really nice example. The next one was using kind of patterns and art to think about shape and geometry in maths, and that was inspired by the work of Kandinsky. We might actually talk a little bit about another way of doing that later on. There were some maths apps, some online tools that were useful, like quizzes and MathSpot. And then Katie. So Katie, last time you shared a different example with us, but you sent another one this time. Do you want to say a few things about this one?
Yeah, I can't quite remember what I sent last time, but this one was just to do with Seesaw. So we use Seesaw for the online learning platform, which we developed before COVID-19, and then obviously when that came in, and we'd used it for all the virtual learning. So this is just an example of one of the children in my SEN group just using something different rather than just recording in a maths book, and showing sort of repeated addition and then looking at multiplication. There was another example I was going to send, but it has a child in the video, so I can't really, but it was another boy recording himself explaining how he was doing multiplication using place value counters, and it was just really clear how he was able to sort of show his understanding and demonstrate exchanging as well, which was really great. And also we've used Padlets from Learning Through You as well. We've used Padlets quite a lot in staff meetings. I find it's really useful for people to refer back to, and we've got one for all the resources we have available and kind of further reading teachers can do, and opportunities that they can sort of read articles and various other things. So that's been useful too.
Cool, thank you. And then yeah, we had another slide from you as well, actually. This is also Seesaw, isn't it?
Yeah, this is Seesaw, and this is just a home learning. So we do all of our home learning now on Seesaw. So we've just written up the task, and then the child had just annotated around as well. And they love leaving voice notes or sending me videos as well. That's another thing they're a big fan of.
Great, thank you for sharing that. And then Laura?
Yeah, so this is Some Dogs. I don't know if any of the other schools have used it before, but it is free. We do have the subscription at the moment, but we just use it for homework as well as within class. So it's really good for home learning. The children get really engaged in it and get really excited, and you can make competitions and things like that. And then Some Dog also have, like for Maths Week, they've got a competition as well. So, and they do local ones as well, so they can take part in lots of different competitions, and Yeah, and they play games whilst they're sort of practicing their math skills. So they find it really enjoyable, and it's quite an easy tool to use as well. So yeah, definitely good for online learning as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Does anybody else use SumDog, just out of interest? Okay, cool. Thanks for the recommendation. This one was from somebody that wasn't able to join, but they did send us an example. So this was from Ray Primary School, and I think they were showing the top pictures, I think, are year ones using Busy Things, and doing some maths games with Busy Things. And then at the bottom, there's another it's another online game, but this time it's year 4, and they're using it to learn about telling the time. So just a couple of nice examples of the use of technology there in maths. But yeah, before we move on, does anybody have, because I know not everybody might have necessarily had a chance to find an example, but does anybody have any other examples of what you've been doing with technology in maths that you'd like to talk about?
And welcome to Kat as well. I think you're there, Kat. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi there. Yeah, so sorry. I had we had an issue with cover, so I had to cover a class really last minute. Yeah, so I'm a year 5 teacher at the study in Wimbledon, and I'm new to the maths lead role this year, but I led maths in my other school. Yeah, nice to meet everyone.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Kat. Cool. So yeah, does anyone else want to talk about any of their uses of technology in maths?
At Hitherfield, we use a lot of apps as well. So Timetable Rockstars is really good. I know that lots of people probably already know about that. And then other in the Key Stage 1 and early years, they use some other sort of simple number apps as maths apps, which are really useful.
Cool, thank you, Katie. Okay, so yeah, so should we move on if that's all from everyone? Oh yeah, Peter, this one's you, isn't it?
Yes. So thank you very much for that. And we felt maybe we should highlight some things that have happened since the last forum. And I know that Ofsted has published a research review, and I started to look into it and wondered whether I should highlight a few points. And then I did come across an article in Schools Week, and as always, what Ofsted publishes is not without controversy, and particularly that Schools Week article highlights how some of the research that's mentioned in the report has been challenged. So I felt that rather than going into detail about that report, it might be useful to highlight that it's there. And actually, if you read the critique of it, there's some really, really interesting ideas there. So I guess that can take us on to the next section, really, which was great to hear about some things that have been working well for you, and your examples. If there's anything else that you'd like to share now, we've got a very, very short activity. This time it's using Jamboard, and maybe there's one question that you could answer using the Jamboard. If you're able to post the link in the chat, Rowan, you may already have done it, I guess. So that is, what is your biggest challenge at the moment as a maths subject lead? But feel free to share any other thoughts as well. And I think we're just going to give you about 3 to 4 minutes to do that.
I suspect a lot of people may have used Jamboard before anyway, but just in case you haven't, you can see there's on the left-hand side a little panel that you can use to add things. And if you click on the sticky note and type something in the box, then you'll get a sticky note on the page. Okay,
so staffing restrictions, yeah. Staffing difficulties, time, as always, lots of maths projects. Yeah, very limited cover. Creative ideas for teaching maths rather than overuse of worksheets. Great, thank you very much for sharing those. And feel free to post anything later on. Yes, being prepared for an Ofsted deep dive, right. Definitely a challenge. Yeah, so some common themes there: time, cover, staffing difficulties, kind of the detail of things. Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing those things. And as I said, feel free to add any other thoughts to that during the session. Rowan, shall I hand over to you now for screen sharing?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, thanks, Peter.
Section now. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for contributing to that activity, everyone. We realised that time and getting cover is one of the most difficult things for teachers in general right now. So we really appreciate you being here, as I know it might not be the easiest thing in the world to organise. So it's really, I think it's really sort of beneficial to our community to have a few people, especially when people are able to come back. So thank you. Cool. So I'm going to share my screen, and here we go. Last time I did a little bit of a section about some ways of using Scratch to support maths. I'm going to do that again today, but with some different examples. Although I might mention some of the previous things as well. So at the CLC, the kind of computer science and programming type stuff is kind of a lot of what I spend my time doing, but there are really clear links with maths in that kind of subject area, and so we're just going to kind of explore some of those, and specifically in relation to Scratch. So to start with, I've got a couple of examples of how you can kind of use Scratch and programming to explore patterns and geometry. So mostly when we do this at the CLC, we do it using the pen tools. So in Scratch, they used to just be a standard Scratch block, but the way that it is now, you have to add them in. You do that by pressing this little blue button at the bottom that's like extra blocks, and then you can select pen, and then you get all of the blocks that are on the right hand side there. And they allow you to do different things with your character. So you can, for example, make it so that your character can, if you use the stamp block, your character will get copied onto the backdrop. Or if you use pen down, then anywhere that your character moves, they'll leave a line behind them. And you can also change what that line looks like. So you can make it thicker, you can change the color, you can apply some different effects to it. And you can kind of use this to create a program that basically kind of leaves a record behind it of all of the movements that your character has undertaken. And that can be a really helpful way of kind of visualizing geometry in Scratch. So this is I wanted to have like a little quick example of what this might look like in practice, that we can kind of just have a very quick go at. So in this instance, this is a set of patterns that have all been created using the same starting sprite, and the sprite you can see a picture of at the top is just a strawberry. And then you can see the instruction blocks that I've created, or the sort of chunks of instruction that I've created underneath. And each of those patterns, the 5 patterns at the top, has been created from one of those scripts underneath. So if the strawberry follows the first set of instructions, then it will create one of those patterns. But what I've done is I've mixed them up, so the blocks that you can see on the screen don't necessarily correspond to the pattern above them. And the idea of this challenge is really to look through each of those sets of instructions and predict which pattern you think it makes. Now, this activity obviously is something that you can do. You can do it quite independently. We actually sent this out while schools were closed as a kind of like daily Scratch activity that kids could have a go at home. But I actually think the best use of something like this is using it as a prompt for discussion, and actually talking about what we can see and talking about what we can deduce. And I think that's something that where programming can be quite helpful as a way of kind of not just visualizing mathematical ideas, but also verbalizing them. Because if you kind of read the program through, you might be able to sort of start to understand how it works and how it does what it's supposed to do. So sometimes I'd say go away and have a go at this on your own, and you can test them out in a second. You can see at the bottom of the screen there is a link to a Scratch project that actually contains each of these scripts, so that you can see what it looks like when your strawberry actually runs the program. But I thought what might be quite nice to do first is just to ask you to predict. So would anybody like to propose, maybe if you tell me like script number 1 or script number 2, tell me whether you think it makes pattern number 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. Any predictions from anyone just from looking at them? I'll give you a few moments to just have a little look.
Amazing what you can do with a strawberry, Rowan. I've gone for the shortest one. I think I've worked that one out.
Okay, do you want to tell us?
Well, so it's script number 3, and actually I might be wrong. I've just seen repeat 12, so I think my reasoning could be wrong actually.
Well, that's a good opportunity for learning. One of the things I talk about a lot in programming with Scratch, and especially in relation to maths, is where mistakes can be helpful. So do you want to tell us what your misconception was, and then maybe we can figure it out?
Well, now I see it says repeat 12. I'm thinking actually that doesn't match up with the picture on the far right, where the colors have changed.
So you were looking at the change color and thinking about how it must be one of them that changes color. Yes.
And I wasn't thinking clearly about how much it was turning either, but I was seeing that there were stamps. So yeah, so okay.
Does anyone want to suggest which one? So program number 3, which says repeat 12, stamp, turn 30 degrees and then change color by 30. Would anyone like to suggest the second one? It is the second one, yeah. And you can, as I say, you can, if you want to test it out, you can visit that link, the URL at the bottom. I think I've given names to each of the programs, so I've kind of used a name that kind of describes what it does. Well, would you want to tell us, Katie, how did you work it out?
Because Peter's highlighting the repeating 12, and then there are 12 little tops of the strawberry around here. So then it was stamped. So he helped me. Thank you.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
I can
and
see
with the
now.
30 degrees as well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. So firstly, the repeat thing, I think, whenever I present this activity to children, I tend to find that there'll be a few, basically, children will take different approaches to sort of picking out a particular detail and using that to help them solve the problem. And actually, you do find that if you just look at the repeat number for each of them, that can be a very, very helpful way of working out what might be going on in the scripts. And as you say, if you know that there's something happening 12 times, then probably the one that has repeat 12 is going to be a pretty good guess. And you can also see that each time it repeats the instructions, it is turning 30 degrees. So if you have a sense of what 30 degrees might look like, and then you look at those strawberries and think, do they look 30 degrees apart, then that's going to help as well. And then also you can see that it changes color each time. So the fact that you have 12 different strawberries and it's turning as it creates them, and they're all slightly different colors, that's a pretty good indication that that's going to be the right pattern. And yeah, you're correct, it is indeed that one. And you can actually use pretty much the same approach to solve kind of all of these, really. You can kind of hone in on a particular detail. So it might be that you hone in on the detail of the number of degrees, and you think, oh, I can see 45 degrees in one of these patterns. Do any of the strawberries look like they might be 45 degrees apart? Or you could hone in on things like the purple blocks that affect the color or the size of the strawberries. So for example, I think only one of them has a change size block. That's the second script. And that tells you that whatever the pattern is, it must have strawberries of different sizes. So that kind of gives you a bit of a clue as to which one it might be. And actually, program number 2 creates pattern number 3, because you can see that on pattern number 3, there are these sort of wheels of different size, wheels of strawberries of different sizes. We also know that we've already figured out which one pattern number 2 is, and that has a change color block in it. And then there's actually really only one other pattern that has lots of different colors in it. There are some that change the brightness or the transparency of the strawberry. Oh, actually no, number 4 changes the color as well, doesn't it? So that helps us to sort of narrow down the different possibilities. Yeah, we have three scripts that change the color of the strawberry: script number 1, script number 3, and script number 4. And then we already know that script number 3 is going to make pattern number 2. So then script number 1 and script number 4 must make the two other patterns that have a color change in them, and then maybe we can use the repeat numbers to figure out which one might be which. So we're kind of like honing in on particular details of what's happening in the script, and that's helping us understand what's happening in the pattern. And while we're doing that, we're using mathematical skills. We might be doing things like looking at the number of degrees and estimating what that looks like on screen. And then another thing about this activity that I'll talk about a little bit more later is to do with really understanding what angles and degrees mean in terms of like a full, like whether something is making a full turn. Because if you actually look at the repeat number and you also look at the turn number, that they will often be kind of corresponding so that they make 360 degrees. So for example, in script number 1, you can see that we have a repeat, we have two repeats, a 6 and an 8, but let's start with the 8. We've got something repeating 8 times, and each time it repeats, our strawberry turns 45 degrees. So if you know your times tables and you know that 8 times 45, or if you can do multiplication, I suppose, you can do 8 times 45, then you might be able to figure out that that's going to make 360. And that tells you a little bit about what that script is going to do. And so I think that Scratch can be a really nice way of visualizing angles in sort of real time, and it's particularly helpful when you actually watch the strawberry draw the pattern. Something that I sometimes do as well is there's a block that says wait 1 second, and I often add that wait 1 second into the repeat instructions so that it slows down the process of drawing out the shape, and then you can really understand how and why the instructions do what they're supposed to do. I think it's just a nice way of visualizing that, and that's kind of like a nice, like, quick little challenge. This next one, I'm not actually going to ask you, well, if you want to have a little go at this during the break, then you can. We'll stop for a break very shortly. But this is an activity where I've made a template project, and it's supposed to produce a picture like the picture you can see on the screen, but you'll find if you open it up that it actually doesn't quite work properly. So at the moment it's creating a tree that is sort of on its side, and so the job with this task is to see if you can fix it. And you can actually see that a couple of people, these are remixes, which means somebody has found my project and then recreated their own version of it. You can see that a few people have remixed it and they have fixed it and made their tree grow upright. So if we press C inside, we can start to figure out what might be going wrong with this project. We can use the magnifying glass to zoom in on the blocks. You can see that it's quite a complex project. There's quite a lot of steps involved, but what I've done to make it easier to understand is I've broken down all of the different processes to create the picture into these kind of different stages. So for example, these instructions draw the sky, these instructions draw the sun, these instructions draw the sand dunes. So the idea of this challenge is to see if you can find the part of the instructions that is causing the tree to grow sideways, and to see whether you can change a single number in a single block in order to fix the picture and make it so that the tree is growing upright. So that's the challenge for that activity. I'm going to give you a chance, if you would like to have a little go at completing that during the break, and we'll stop for 10 minutes now if you think that's good timing. Peter, are you happy with that?
Yes, and you've probably seen I've posted the links to your 2 examples.
Oh, fantastic! Thank you, Peter. Yeah. So if you would like to have a little, if you'd like to peruse the strawberry activity, or if you'd like to have a go at fixing the broken palm tree project, maybe you might get a chance to do that over your break. But if you would rather just go and get yourself a cup of tea, you're very welcome to do that as well. And we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes' time. Lovely. Okay, so how did people get on? Did anybody manage to fix the palm tree project? I'm going to share my screen again. Here we are. Okay, and I'm going to open up that link and take a look inside. Yes, so I'll click on the green flag so that we can just see what's happening when we run the script. One thing that you notice when program is running in Scratch is that the blocks kind of like light up to show you where it's up to. So you can see that these yellow ones right now are the big leaves. So that's what it was drawing. And now it's moved on to the little leaves. And that shows you that those ones are lighting up. But when it was drawing the trunk, the kind of highlighted block was, unsurprisingly, the section called Define Trunk. And that is the bit that we know is going a bit wrong, because that's the bit that's off sideways. And if you have a look at the blocks in that list of instructions for trunk, you can see that at the moment it says define trunk. So when it draws the trunk, it's going to set the pen color to number 20. So we can probably guess that and also set the pen shade to 30. So color 20, I think, is actually kind of like an orangey color, but because the shade is low, that's what makes it kind of go brown. And then it goes to a certain position, and you can see X and Y coordinates feature here, which is another really helpful kind of mathematical aspect of how Scratch works. It sets the pen size to 50, and then it points in direction 90. Now that might not seem like it means too much, direction 90, without any kind of context of what is it 90 degrees in comparison to. That might not seem like it really means anything, but if you click on the number 90, you can see the way that direction works in Scratch. It kind of, if you imagine it, it's sort of like a clock face, and 12 o'clock is 0 degrees. Any number that you see on direction is in relation to that 12 o'clock. So 90 is 90 degrees clockwise away from up, which means that 90 actually just means point to the right in Scratch terms. So if you want to make your character point upwards, I mean, one way you can do it is simply by moving that arrow. So you don't actually need to know what the numbers are, but you'll see that when I do point that arrow up, it changes to 0. And then you can kind of see, so 0 is up, 90 is right, 180 is going to be down. When you make it point left, it goes to minus 90. But if you type 270, that also works because it's 3 times 90. So if you imagine it going clockwise, it would go clockwise 270 degrees, but it's showing us a kind of anti-clockwise direction. So I'm going to put it at 0, and then I'm going to click the green flag again, and then you can see that the project is now fixed. So that's how we can make our palm tree draw upright. Also, a useful thing to know is if you're ever using a project like this in Scratch that runs very slowly and takes quite a long time, if you hold the shift button and press the green flag, it goes into something called turbo mode, which makes everything happen really, really quickly. So if I want to finish off that picture and test it out quickly, I can hold shift and try it in turbo mode instead. But actually what I'm going to do now is I'm going to re-break the project so that the next time somebody comes to try it out, it hasn't already been solved for them. So I've just reset that. So that's a little bit of an example of how you might use Scratch and drawing to explore geometry. There are some slightly more simple examples here as well, and I will send you these slides after today. So I'm going to just kind of whiz through them a little bit, but just to kind of give you an outline. If it's something that you'd be interested in exploring more, then do feel free to look back at the slides later. But one task that I sometimes give to children when we're talking about maths in Scratch is I introduce the pen blocks and talk about what they mean, and the idea that you can put your pen down and it will make your character draw a line, and a little bit about the movement. And then I ask them if they can figure out how to make the cat draw a square. Sometimes I'll actually give them the blocks that they need. So I'll show them the blocks maybe on the board, but I won't connect them together. I won't talk about what order to put them in. And then their job will be to put the numbers in the blocks and to put them in the right order to make their character draw a shape. And so you can see in this example, to draw a square, you're going to need you don't have to use a repeat block, because you could just put the same blocks in over and over again. But obviously using a repeat is going to make it quicker and easier for us to create this shape, because in order to draw a square, our character needs to go forward and then turn 90 degrees, and then forward and then turn 90 degrees, and then forward and turn 90 degrees 4 times until it gets all the way around. So that's drawing a square. And of course, when we're thinking about squares and we're thinking about degrees, we're always going to be thinking about right angles. So that number 90 is really important here. But it actually can lead to a little bit of a misconception when it comes to drawing other shapes. And actually what I tend to find is if you show people this script and they get it working and they draw a square, and then you ask them to sort of apply the same principle to create a triangle instead, you often find that they will try using the wrong number the first time they do it. And usually the number that I see them try is number 60. And I say usually, it depends to what extent the kids have talked about angles and triangles at school. But if they've looked at triangles and they know that the interior angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees, then often they will guess that 60 degrees is going to be the turn number they need to draw a triangle, because they know that the interior angles of an equilateral triangle are all 60 degrees, because 60 times 3 is 180. And so this is one of those mistakes, like I was talking about before. I really like to kind of encourage children to feel comfortable making mistakes and learning from them, because this is a type of mistake that demonstrates to me that they're applying their existing knowledge. It's kind of like a really helpful mistake. It does make things go wrong, but it makes them go wrong in quite an interesting way. And then we can learn from it and apply it in order to do things differently. Now, if you do want to draw a triangle, the number you'll actually need is 120. And the reason for that is that the important angle when you're drawing shapes in this way isn't the interior angle. It's not this smaller, this acute angle inside the triangle, but it is the exterior angle. Because when you draw a shape in Scratch, each time you get to a corner, your character isn't actually facing in towards the shape. Your character is facing outwards away from the corner. And then when it turns, the angle that it turns is the exterior angle. So if you imagine a line continuing from the edge of one of your shapes, and then you drew the angle between that line and the next edge of the shape that you have to draw, that is the angle that you would need your character to turn. And you can calculate that because it's basically a straight line with the interior angle cut away from it. You can calculate it by doing 180 minus 60 to get 120 degrees, and that's the angle that you'll need. And another way of thinking about it as well is whichever shape you're drawing, whether you're drawing a square or a triangle or another shape, you're going to be making your character turn all the way around and then go back to the start, which means the total number of degrees that it will turn is going to be 360. So another way of thinking about it could be, if I'm turning 3 times and I want to make a total of 360 degree turns, then I need to do 360 divided by 3 in order to work out the size of each individual turn, and then that will also give you 120. So there are actually a couple of ways of working this out, which means it lends itself really well to a little bit of a maths investigation. And I often also ask them to do this next, and just to kind of really highlight the point that sometimes mistakes are helpful, I will often also ask them to see if they can work out how to draw a hexagon. And actually the angle that you need to draw a hexagon is going to be the angle that many of them probably will have entered when they tried to draw a triangle, which is 60 degrees, because 60 times 6 is 360. So that's what you would need to draw a hexagon. You'd also obviously have to change the repeat number to 6 so that your character went all the way around and then stopped when it got to the end. But it's just quite a nice little way of kind of setting out a bit of a little bit of a maths investigation using Scratch and using those numbers. And if any of you have ever used Probots can do a really similar thing, but they're a physical robot. They look like a little car and you can put a pen into them and you can program them to move forward and turn and move and turn. And so you can actually do really similar thing, but like physically with a physical object, the same sort of mathematical investigation with programming. So you can use this pattern. Once you've identified the pattern, you can use that pattern to figure out all sorts of different shapes. So for example, if you wanted to draw an octagon, then you'd know that by dividing 360 by 8, you'd get 45 degrees. And that would mean that your turn number would be 45 in order to draw an octagon, and so on. So this is another example that I actually kind of encountered this recently, and it was kind of a bit unexpected to me. So Peter knows that I was at home recently because my dad had been unwell, and I was with my family, and I spent a little bit of time with my nephew, and he's 5, and he's quite interested in sort of learning to do a little bit of programming, and to be honest, he's more interested in creating pictures. That's what he likes to spend a lot of time doing in his spare time. He likes getting sticker books and lots of stickers and designing like a scene with them, and he loves animals. So when I showed him Scratch Junior first, he got a bit bored of it, and then he wanted to try using Scratch. I showed him Scratch, and the thing that he really liked about it was the fact that you could have a background, and then you can put lots of different objects onto that background, and you can create your own design. And he got quite excited about that, and he wanted to do it lots of times. So we made this project together, and I should say, he's 5, and he did have quite a lot of support with this. I'm not suggesting that this is a realistic expectation for a 5-year-old. But if I press the green flag, you can see what this project does. So in this instance, Peter, I think there's someone in the waiting room if you'd like to admit them. Yeah, so in this instance, he chose an underwater background, and then he wanted to add all of these different underwater animals to it. And then we also had to go at kind of making some of them move randomly and animating it a little bit. And you can see that the octopus tells us that if we press the space bar, we'll get another scene. But the thing that I thought was really interesting about this was the fact that each time we made a scene, he chose his characters and he placed them where he wanted them to go on the background. And then he also had to think about the size of the character. And the way that you control the size of the character in Scratch is, if I press C inside, you click on a character, and then you can see just here, it tells you that, for example, the pufferfish size is set to 40, the shark size is set to 60, the octopus is set to 70. Now, when we added each of these objects in, they were all just on 100, and it's 100%. Its original size is 100 every time. And we had quite a lot of discussion about how big he wanted his characters to be and whether he wanted them to be bigger than they currently were or smaller than they currently were. And in order to change the size, we had to basically apply an understanding of percentages and proportion. And what was really interesting was when we did the first scene, when we did the Under the Sea one, he didn't really understand it yet. So his first suggestions were things like, I think that the shark should be a size 8, because 8, I think so often we talk about things in terms of being out of 10, and 8 sounded quite big to him. But when we tried number 8 for our shark, you can see it comes up really, really, really tiny, and it's much smaller than he wanted it to be. And then I talked to him a little bit about what the 100 meant and why 8 was so small. And then he started to develop a little bit more of an understanding of what kind of number was going to create the sort of size that he wanted. And you can see, I mean, he was really, really into this. So we did it many, many, many times. But in a relatively short space of time, he developed a really impressively deep understanding of proportion in relation to percentages, to the point that when we were doing the final few characters, he was getting really precise about the numbers he was selecting. So he drew this, it's meant to be a fly, I think, and he said to me, I think it should be about 34 or 35. And then we tried out those two numbers and he picked the one that he thought was right. And I just thought that it was quite an interesting example of a tool being used in a slightly unexpected way to develop an understanding of maths. It's not necessarily something that I would I suggest it as an activity? I mean, potentially. I guess we do a lot of stuff with kind of animation in Scratch, and we talk about the programming and the making things happen one after the other. But sometimes actually one of the most kind of captivating things for kids can be sort of setting the scene and creating the kind of setting that the action happens in. And actually that provides some really interesting opportunities to think about maths and what maths actually means in terms of geometry and position and size and all that sort of thing. So it was just kind of like an unexpected moment of kind of real deep application of mathematical understanding. Yeah, and then, so the next one, this is perhaps a slightly more conventional use of Scratch to talk about maths, and this is to do with multiplication, and it's actually to do with variables. Now, again, I'm going to show you these slides, and if you want to have a look through them, this is an activity that we do with children at the CLC sometimes, and the way we start it off is basically to say to them, you start with an empty Scratch project, so you've just got your cat and a blank background, and the task is to see if you can program your cat to count to 10. And you can do that using this instruction block here that says, say hello for 2 seconds. Except I always tell them I want it to take 10 seconds to count to 10. So basically, they'll need to change hello to 1, and they'll need to change 2 also to 1 in order to get the cat to count to 1 and take 1 second to do it. And then they'll need to add more instructions to their program so that instead of just saying 1, the cat says 1, 2, 3, 4. And there are, again, a couple of ways of doing this. And the most kind of simple, perhaps the most obvious solution is to just get 10 of those purple blocks and put them one after the other and change what the cat says each time so that your cat is counting to 10. And that is a perfectly good solution that works. It works very well. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. However, when we want to kind of start getting a little bit more mathematical and also a little bit more elegant in our programming in Scratch, this is a really good example of introducing variables and why they can be useful. So a variable in programming is where it's kind of like it's a value that exists in your program, but the value can change. So looking at this example, you can see that my cat is talking, and each time it speaks, it says a number, and each time it speaks, that number gets 1 bigger. So this could be a good opportunity for us to use a variable so that instead of manually changing the number every time we add a block, we can get the number to change automatically by programming it. And so a variable is sort of saved with one of these or stored in one of these like curved blocks. This one's called my variable, but you can name your own variable and make them and call them different things. I've just left it at my variable in this example, but you can see, so this program, we can see here, actually does exactly the same thing as this one. The output will be the same, because what it's going to do is it's going to set this number, this variable number, to 0. But then it's going to follow these instructions 10 times. The first thing it's going to do is it's going to change that number 0, and it's going to change it by 1, which means that the number is going to go from 0 to 1. And then it's going to say the number. So on the first repetition, the cat is going to say 1 for 1 second. And then it's going to follow these instructions again. So it's going to change the variable again by 1, which means it will be 2. And then it's going to say it. So then it's going to say 2. And then it's going to change it again and say it. And then it's going to change it again and say it. And so the result of that program is going to be the same as the previous one. It's going to keep saying a number, but it's going to work its way through the numbers until it gets to number 10. And the fact that I've made my program in this way actually gives me a lot more flexibility in terms of other things I could do with my program. Because I talked about doing multiplication and times tables, but I mean, counting, we're doing the 1 times tables, I suppose, but counting to 10 isn't necessarily something we think of as being times tables or multiplication. But actually, now that we've got this basic structure, we can change a few numbers in our program and we can make it do much more complex things. So for example, I could make it count to 100 by changing my repeat number to 100, and it would just carry on until it got to 100. I could make it recite the 12 times tables by, instead of changing my variable each time by just 1, I could change it by 12, and then it's going to go up in 12s each time. I could get it to count down from 70 in 7s. And so to do that, I'd need to use a minus number instead of a positive number. So I'd need to use -7. And I would also need to start on a different number in order to make sure that I didn't just go down into minus numbers straight away. So I'd have to set my variable at the beginning to a higher positive number. And actually, because we're subtracting, because we're changing our number before we're saying it, I'd need to start my number off. I think I'd need to start it at 77, so that it would start at 77, subtract 7, and then say 70. And then it would carry on. And I'd need to make sure that I got my repeat number right as well. And then that last one is a little bit of an extension activity that I sometimes do with kids, where if you've ever used the ask block, which you find in the sensing section, that allows you to get the person who's watching the program to enter a number, and then you can use that number in your program. So that's kind of a little bit of an additional challenge. And if you're curious about how that would work, I've put an example of that project in action on the next slide. So if you click on this one, you can actually see an example of that, and you can press C inside and you can have a look at what the instructions are to make that happen. So obviously this one is quite a lot more complex than the other ones that we were looking at, but that is something that has come up in classes with kids before. And then before I finish off this little Scratch and Math section, just to mention this really helpful resource, which is it's a maths-based Scratch curriculum produced by UCL from their team, their knowledge lab. It was part of a research project into using programming to support maths teaching, and it's a really kind of deep and thorough set of materials. There's a lot in there, so if you follow this link, you'll find the resources on the website and you can download them. It's quite content heavy, to the point that it's actually almost a bit too content heavy. And what I would say about that is it was designed to be used in a research project. So they had to be really careful about exactly how it was being used, which means it's a lot more prescriptive than you would necessarily always want resources to be. But what you do find in there is template projects and presentations to use with pupils. And I'd say those are the two most helpful things if you're thinking about using these materials with your pupils at school. It's designed specifically for year 5 and 6 to meet the requirements of the maths curriculum in those age groups. So it talks a lot about things like coordinates and geometry and that sort of thing. So yeah, just a really helpful resource that I thought that I would mention. And I think that's me with my Scratch bit done. So I'll hand back over to Peter.
Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you, Rowan, for shedding more light on the way that Scratch and maths can be, fruitful partnership there. So yes, we said at the beginning we'd like to share with you another project that we're involved with. So I'm going to speak very briefly about it. We have got some activities for you to do. This will probably be quite brisk. So the project that we're in with partner organisations in Belgium, the Netherlands and Sweden is called Empower2Learn, and we're in the middle of the project at the moment, and we've been developing what we hope will be a useful toolkit for teachers. And the focus of the project is all about personalised learning, and like so many terms, personalised learning means all sorts of things to any given person. Another platform that we've used quite frequently is Mentimeter, and I don't know if you've used that yourself, but Mentimeter allows you to get input from personal input, you could say, from participants. And what we thought we'd do is create a word cloud this time. So if on a separate browser window on your device, or if you want to do it on your phone, you're welcome to do that. If you go to menti.com, and you enter the code that you can see on the screen, 42943867, menti.com, that's 42943867. There's a chance for you to do as many times as you want, enter words or phrases that you think personalised learning means, and thinking specifically about maths. I'm just going to show you also, if I can come out of my presentation a second. Just going to show you what the Menti looks like. So when I click on Present Now, someone's already added in relevant to their lives. Yeah, that's relevant to them personally. That makes sense. So feel free to contribute, and the code is at the top there again, 42943867. If you haven't gone there yet. So we're going to give you about 2 minutes to reflect on personalised learning. Yes, the learning that's engaging. This is all making sense. Fun, engaging, interactive. Got assessment coming in. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So that's given a flavour of the many meanings of personalised learning, and this is something that we've been grappling with in the project, and had quite a lot of discussion about whether we could come to a definition of personalised learning. So we've got a working definition in our E2L, our Empower2Learn project, and so in terms of the project, we're talking about learning that empowers students to become active in their learning pathways, so that if you like, pupils, children are actually having some personal interest and control, and learning that tailors learning activities to meet their needs, abilities and interests. So I think your contributions are kind of reflected well in that definition. And on the other side of the slide, drawing on quite a lot of academic papers and research about personalised learning over the past few years, there are indeed many dimensions of personalised learning. So a few of them are itemised there. And on the website that isn't yet public, we're going to have a kind of toolkit, and the logo for the project is a kind of compass rose. And so we've got 4 different quadrants, if you like, 4 different types of tools and platforms, because it's, I forgot to say, it's about digital tools, ICT, that supports personalised learning. And the first section that we're taking a quick look at now actually contains tools, some of which we've used today. So examples might be Padlet, Jamboard and Mentimeter itself. Also, I'm sure many of you are familiar with tools like Kahoot or quizzes was mentioned in one of the examples we had on the slides earlier. There are lots and lots of possible apps that can be used in a one-off way in one particular lesson. So any thoughts on how any of those tools might help with maths? Do you want to unmute and reflect on how you might have used any of those tools or similar ones? Any thoughts from anyone?
Can I just ask what Kahoot is? I haven't used that before.
So Kahoot, sorry, is a quiz tool, and it can be used for any subject really, and it's quite engaging. And you can almost have too much of a good thing with Kahoot because it has dramatic music, it has animations, it has scores, so it's a kind of gamification. As a teacher, you can determine any content that you want in Kahoot. There's a free version available. You can also use Kahoot for self-paced learning for pupils as well. So yeah, do take a look at Kahoot. We use it sometimes for some of our projects.
It can be a really fun activity to do with like a whole class where maybe they're working in teams, like on their different tables, and the question comes up on the screen, and then they have to use a device on their table to answer. But you get like a leaderboard as you go through the quiz, so it can inspire a lot of friendly competition and excitement and stuff like that. I think a lot of teachers like to use it kind of at the end of the day as a sort of fun way of reviewing some of the learning in the lesson.
Yeah, and on the right-hand side, in our Empower2Learn project, we've got a number of different tools, and there are many, many others as well. They're only a representative sample. Okay, so, and as I say on this slide, many, many others. We're not particularly promoting these, just that we're speaking in this session today about our own experience. So here's just some ideas of how these tools can help with personalized learning. And again, just extracting some of the key points from our project. So yeah, so digital tools can be used for differentiation. Students can practice at their own level using digital learning materials. Some tools and platforms generate data. I think probably SumDog and some of the other platforms like that allow you as a teacher to see strengths and weaknesses of individual students. And some tools are adaptive. What you get in the tool varies according to how well you are coping with the activities that are presented. And on the right-hand side, picking up about students being empowered in their own learning. Students can get feedback and data from specific tools on how they're doing, and those can help them gain insights and take control of their own learning. And we're going to explore that a little bit further in a moment or two. Last forum, we had a Padlet where some of you kindly contributed. We've got that still going. So after this session, if you have a chance to reflect and you want to add anything onto that Padlet where we've got a whole range of other tools listed, please do take a look at that, and we'll send that link out to you as well. It would be great if we could continue to develop that as a resource for teachers. Okay, so moving on really quickly to consider briefly the other three areas of the toolkit. The next section is about complete platforms linked to one discipline. In other words, subject-specific tools and apps. And over on the right, there are some maths tools listed: Bluetick, MathsWiz, MathSpace, and so on. And we've got more on the Padlet that I just mentioned to you. And then there are ones that relate to language learning, like Duolingo, and so on. But one that I came across just very recently preparing for this session that isn't in our toolkit is GeoGebra. Do any of you use GeoGebra at all? Have you come across it? Okay, well, I thought it might be useful to give you an opportunity to have a quick go, GeoGebra is completely free. It's a kind of open platform. So it's really easy to browse for activities or resources and to set them up as a teacher. And I'm just skimming through the slides here very quickly. So that one that we've got here, we've got a link to that. So you don't need to log in to join. The next slide is just showing you that you can give a nickname or add in your own name and you can join. So I was thinking about puzzles, and I know tangrams are a particular puzzle that I like. Here we are in GeoGebra, and I came across what GeoGebra calls a book. So that's a sequence of different activities. I clicked on Create Lesson, and that immediately packages things up into a format that can be viewed by you. So I need to be logged in. I think I'm logged out.
Yeah, and if you haven't already, if you click on the link that's in the chat, it'll ask you, it'll suggest that you sign in, but you can actually just write your name in the box at the bottom, and so it's really, really quick and straightforward to access. I can see some of you have done that already.
Okay, and I've managed to get it up on the screen now. So yeah, you're in there, and I joined it the other day, and Rowan, you joined it yesterday. And what's really nice, I think, about this platform is that it shows you progress live. You can pause the activities. So if you've got pupils working on these in class, or perhaps in a remote learning context, and you want to stop and explain something, you can hit the pause button. You can also hide names if you don't. If you want to talk about something, but you don't want individual students' names showing. So yeah, I'd recommend you take a look, as it's a completely free resource, and there are many useful tools, and just picking up on one or two more. I guess the theme of this forum, like the last one, is kind of visualizing things. So I know that I would find this sort of tool quite useful. So this one is for teaching multiplication, and in the same tool, haven't seen anything quite like this before. You can switch between different animations to present something in a range of different ways. And I know there are many tools out there, but I liked some of what I saw in GeoGebra. So although many platforms have and tools are free to a certain extent, often you get the best content when you are subscribing, but GeoGebra seems to be completely free. So again, just to emphasize some of the useful features that platforms can offer. You often have some kind of teacher dashboard. Learners can have a certain amount of autonomy within a structure that's been provided by the teacher, or maybe by the experts, often teacher contributors to a particular tool. And then there's the whole visual, audio, input and output as well. And particularly useful is real-time feedback, and tools that are adaptive can be giving that directly to pupils, allowing you as a teacher to concentrate on where the need is most. Okay, and then quickly moving on to the third section of portfolio systems. So examples for that, there are many maths ones, but I know we've had a little mention of Seesaw previously. So Rowan?
Yeah, so yeah, I'll just very quickly mention Seesaw because Katie, you already mentioned it earlier, using it at Hitherfield. We really like Seesaw. If you're not familiar with it, it's essentially, it's almost like a little bit of a kind of enclosed social media platform for your class, which, I mean, maybe that's not the best way of that. I know that probably sets off alarm bells, but it's in the sense that it kind of creates a stream that is collaborative and that other pupils can look at. But at the same time, you can share it with parents, but you can just share individual pupils and with their parents. And then the way it works usually is the teacher will set a task, and then the pupils will respond by submitting their piece of work, and then the teacher can comment on the work, or can respond to it in some way. And I suppose, so this is an example of a portfolio system in the sense that it's an opportunity for children to kind of record and store a record of what they've been doing over time, and they can look back on that record so they can see how their learning has progressed. The example that we gave on this slide is how Rosendale School used it as part of a research project that they did, an EEF funded project, which was about metacognition. So the children were using Seesaw to reflect upon their learning in maths and reading. And the reason I mentioned that example today specifically is that it showed that the kind of metacognition approach showed real promise in maths. Pupils made an average of 4 months additional progress over the course of the project. So I suppose in terms of personalisation, it can be personalised because pupils can choose the format in which they present their work. Katie, you showed an example earlier of people using it. They were using the drawing function, weren't they, to write out number sentences. But you can also do things like recording voice, a little bit like Padlet. So it's one of those things where it's a very versatile tool, and that's kind of, I think, what makes it helpful for personalisation. But the fact that pupils can kind of reflect upon and look back over their own progress, I think, is something that really kind of brings it into its own, and it makes it quite a helpful tool. Did you want to say anything else about it, Katie, just as someone who's been using it with your own pupils?
It's really useful, very user-friendly. We used to do all the homework before in their homework books, but since the sort of closing of schools and having Seesaw as our main online learning platform, children are so used to it that now all homework goes onto Seesaw, so it's far easier to mark and to look at. They love sort of leaving voice notes, and it is easy for you. Like when we were doing virtual school, it was a lot easier to leave a voice note or just some words of support when they're having an absolute meltdown about something. And then it felt like we were there with them, which was obviously quite a challenge as we were not. But yeah, it's a really useful program. They can record videos, you can do almost like slideshows. I use it a lot in class as well for just demonstrating their understanding. So I'll go and say, prove to me that you know how to, do short division or something, and then they can go and record a video, and you can actually you can draw on the slide whilst you're speaking. So that's really good.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's really helpful to have a real example. But yeah, so it's a helpful, versatile tool. It's one, like any of these things, it's not so much the tool as it's how you use it, but I think it has a lot of really helpful functionality for using it very effectively.
And I know that on the EEF website, there's some new resources about the whole ReflectEd project as well. So we'll include those links when we send stuff out to you. So that moving on really swiftly. So then the fourth kind of section of the compass points, the fourth one is what's grandly called holistic education systems. And on the right hand side, there's a range of platforms used across the countries that are partners. I guess for the UK context, we'd be talking about the two platforms that the government subsidise, so Google Classroom and Microsoft 365. But I know we're almost at the end of the section, so this action planning, you're very welcome to do this in your heads just now. So one thing that you've taken from today, hopefully there's at least one thing that you'll use in the future. And I mentioned the further reading. So just to quickly bring up that Padlet, please do contribute anything else that you've got. We've put a few more things on. That resource that I mentioned right at the start as well is on there. Had we had a little bit more time, I would have talked about Atom Learning that someone put on in the last forum. Had a really interesting demonstration from them. And adaptive learning, again, there's a free version that's available to all schools, and for homework and pupils getting automatic feedback. That might be something that you're interested in looking at alongside other platforms as well. And then the resource that I showed earlier, which itself is from a Padlet that includes a huge number of links to useful resources, that's on there as well.